I really feel bad for my parents or my grandparents for whatever I perceived as their stress or tension in their relationship. I'm going to nurture them in my thoughts.
Hmm.
I'm going to be kind to them in my thoughts. And in being kind to them, I'm going to have the courage to create that frequency of kindness within my own mind, so that when I feel the tension in my own relationships that I recall as the tension I experienced in my parents, I'm going to be kind to myself or kind to my partner in order to nurture the relationship in a way that is more courageous rather than fearful.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit, a podcast exploring the intersection of Western astrology and Jungian psychology. Astrology is a language that communicates how the planets and stars influence life on Earth, while psychology helps us navigate both conscious and unconscious experiences. Together, these tools offer the potential for self-understanding, growth, and transformation. Join astrologer Scott Tajarian and me, psychotherapist Gabriella Durso, as we dive into the cosmic forecast each week.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit. This is the week of June 24th to the 30th. Hi, Gabriella.
Hi, Scott.
Before we get started, this week I just want to thank all of our sponsors, the listeners who are sponsoring this podcast with a monetary monthly contribution. I want to thank Suzanne, Sarah, Brenna, Kendra, Jasmine, Janelle, Aline, Ricky, Annie, Haley, and Carrie. Thank you for your support of this podcast with your monthly monetary contribution. If you would like to contribute to this podcast because you feel like you are getting something out of it and it is within your budget to make a monthly contribution, you can do so on Spotify. There is an option on Spotify to donate $1, $5, or $10 a month to our podcast. And if it's not in your budget to make a monthly contribution to our podcast, but you would like to support us in another way, you can do so by subscribing to our channel on YouTube, liking our videos, rating us highly on whatever platform you're listening on, and you could also write a review, a positive review of the podcast. Any and all ways that you can support us that I just mentioned are very much appreciated by Gabriella and me.
Yes, we appreciate any feedback. It helps us know how our content is landing with you, and it's a nice energetic exchange.
Yes.
And monetarily, I'll just say that the funds go towards compensating Scott for his time for the editing that he's doing, which has been a huge undertaking, but also helping us, the ratings, the reviews, the subscriptions, all of it helps us get more visibility online so that it's possible that we could extend our reach. I know Scott has some hopes and dreams on the YouTube platform about maybe utilizing that further.
I want to be putting out more content on YouTube. I just don't have the time to record and edit everything that I want to put out, but I envision having a lot of videos on there of myself talking about astrology and sort of the basics of astrology. Videos that are easily searchable and applicable to people that want to learn what does the sun mean in astrology? What does the moon mean in astrology? What is Mars and Venus and Mercury? And what does it mean in this sign and that sign and so on and so forth? I want to do more videos like that. Really short, like 2 to 5 minute videos.
And I would say there's a direct connection too to the more that this podcast is supporting you financially, the more you'll be able to
have the time to
do
exactly.
that. So
yes.
maybe that's the connection.
Totally, exactly.
So it's not just from a vanity perspective.
No, exactly.
There are goals here to really reach more of you and more listeners in general with more knowledge and information that will hopefully be free.
Exactly. Yes.
Is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We know not everybody has the financial means to be able to come for an astrology reading or to be able to work with me in therapy, and we're aware of that. So those are some no cost or low cost ways for you to contribute if you feel called to do so.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This week there are 7 transits that we're highlighting, 3 of which include Mercury and 2 of which include Venus. But before we get into these transits, I wanted to do a call out, as I've been doing every week, for people that are born during certain years that could be affected by the transit of the sun or the transit of Mars afflicting their Pluto, which means that for the dates that I'm going to give, if you were born in one of these years, there is a good chance that you may be experiencing a challenging transformation this week. And it's something for you to not be fearful of, but to rather lean into and refrain from resisting the transformation that is occurring, no matter how difficult that may be. So if you were born between 1945 and 1950, Mars, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, and conflict, this week is transiting from 11 to 16 degrees in Taurus, the fixed earth sign symbolized by the bull. If you were born between 1945 and 1950, then Mars is squaring your Pluto, the god of death, lord of the underworld, the planet of transformation. When you were born, 1945 to 1950, Pluto was in the fixed fire sign, symbolized by the lion, Leo. If you were born between 1987 and 1990, the transiting Mars is opposing your Pluto. When you were born, Pluto was in the fixed water sign symbolized by the scorpion, Scorpio. So 1945 to 1950 and 1987 to 1990. The transiting Mars is either squaring or opposing your Pluto. You are being pushed into a transformation. Be open to it.
I often think of strong transits with Pluto as bringing to the surface some sort of suffering. And we often think of suffering as something that we're trying to avoid. I would say that our culture is predominantly oriented towards avoiding suffering or medicating against suffering or somehow sublimating it so that maybe it's happening, but we're unaware of it, trying to escape it somehow.
Yes.
But the more we resist the suffering that is happening for us, the longer it persists.
Yes.
So in order to work with this energy, what will help you to move through it more easily and ultimately more quickly is to integrate the lesson that's coming up for you, that's asking to be learned. You know, it reminds me of I'm thinking about how popular it is to like pop an Advil or Tylenol when we have a headache.
Totally.
But we've all probably experienced that we get temporary relief from taking a Tylenol. And then as soon as it's worn off, we're like, oh, the headache is still there. It's like you have that experience of knowing, okay, I'm numbing myself to this pain that I'm experiencing, but it's actually still there. There's sort of like, it just gets pushed further away. And then eventually you have to deal with it again anyway. And one other thing I just wanted to say about suffering and transformation is the awareness of suffering, not only on a personal level, but also collectively. The vulnerability it takes to share your suffering with others is what can contribute to transformation. So maybe there's a time and a place to take that Advil, and there's a time and a place to be vulnerable and open with the fact that you are suffering, so that on a collective level, or like you're saying, generationally with these two different groups, we can recognize I'm not the only one suffering here. I think we have a tendency to think that there's something wrong with me. I can't live in this society, this culture. I can't live in this way. I'm the problem. So I need to take something to alleviate my own suffering. But the more that, and fit in, but the more that we can acknowledge that maybe it's society that needs to change, it's actually an external problem, not an internal problem, which is often the case. But in order to get to that awareness, it requires vulnerability on the part of the individual.
For sure.
Yes. So that's just sort of a side note.
Yes, appreciate that. Now, if you were born between 1972 and 1976, the sun, which is transiting through Cancer from 3 to 9 degrees, is going to be squaring your Pluto in Libra. Well, if you were born between 2009 and 2013, the sun is going to be opposing your Pluto in Capricorn. This is a transformation to your identity. For those born between 1972 and 76, the transformation is pushing you to find greater kindness and more nurturing in your close personal relationships. While those born between 2009 and 2013, which is obviously a much younger group, maybe there's some parents listening that have kids that were born during that time, the challenge for them is finding that kindness and nurturing in terms of working towards their goals and ambitions. This generation that was born with Pluto and Capricorn, it's a generation that could be very hard on themselves. And so this Cancer season brings about a calling for them to find kindness and caring and nurturing for themselves towards their goals and ambitions.
So a lot of shifting coming up. Always.
Yes, but particularly for those groups. Yes. So I'm curious to know if any of our listeners this week or in any of the past weeks that we've mentioned this, I know a couple have reached out, but I'm always curious to know, how is this resonating with you? Are you somebody who was born during these years that we're mentioning here? And is this something that resonates with you? Of course, my objective here is always I want whatever we're sharing to be something that is beneficial to you in the journey of your life each week. Let's move into the week.
Sounds good.
The first transit of the week involves Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, Lady Luck, the planet of relationships, as it transits through Cancer, the cardinal water sign symbolized by the crab, and squares the North Node, which is the karmic pathway of the soul or soul's purpose, as it transits through the cardinal fire sign symbolized by the ram Aries. This transit is occurring from June 24th to the 27th, that's Monday through Thursday, with an exact square occurring on Wednesday, June 26th. So this transit is urging us to face our insecurities and our fears with regards to relationships. We've talked a lot about Venus transiting through Cancer over the last couple of episodes and how it creates an opening for us to reflect upon the origins of our relationships. So in thinking about what are my greatest fears in my relationships, what are my insecurities, and where do these stem from? Like, is there an area in your relationships, whether it be with a lover, a friend, or a business partner, where it's like this always seems to be a conflict? It doesn't matter whether it's with a lover, a friend, or a business partner. I'm always running into this same sort of obstacle. What is that for you? And in thinking about the obstacle as it exists in your present relationship, when was the last time you experienced this obstacle? And when was the first time you experienced this obstacle? When you get back to that first time, take a moment maybe this week and go back in time and be there for your younger self. To show that kind, nurturing nature that maybe you didn't receive in that moment, that will help, through that love and nurturing, give you the courage that you need to face these insecurities and fears presently.
I love what you're saying about starting with sort of this deep dive into your own relationship history. I think that's incredibly valuable. Kind of tracing and tracking, when is the first time this came up, and how did maybe my patterns in relationships become sort of cyclical in nature. I appreciate how you're inviting us to look back at our own relationship patterns. I think there's a lot of value in that. What are the patterns that I'm perpetuating, and maybe what is my role in that pattern? So looking at the pattern and then also looking at your part in contributing to the pattern. But also when we talk about looking at the past, this Venus in Cancer, and looking at maybe the origins, we have to include our original family system in that. And our first example of what a relationship looked like was our parents. And not just the relationship that you had with each of your parents or with each of your family members, although that's important, but the relationship between your two parents and how they related to one another.
So it's you witnessing them.
It's you witnessing. And one thing we have to remember with our childhood is we might remember the things that we were taught verbally, right? Like things we learned in school, or maybe rules that we had in our home. But we learn, so much of our learning as children is more of the implicit learning, where we learn by example. So it's not actually passed down verbally, versus a more explicit style of learning would be your parents sitting you down and saying, you have to look both sides before you cross the street, for example. Those kinds of lessons are in the psyche, absolutely, in a more conscious way. But the implicit learning, how we saw our parents treating one another and not what they were necessarily saying to each other, but what maybe their nonverbal communication was. All of that is also stored within our psyche, within our system. So part of what I think this is about is being willing to look at having the courage, right? The North Node in Aries is ultimately about facing the fear, doing it anyway, and having the courage to maybe look at the roots of some of these dynamics and how whatever part of that relationship between our parents that we are playing out in our own relationships, we need to go back and actually process what it was like for us to witness it as a child first. Because we're replaying it because there's something we want to understand about it. So often we go through life choosing partners, friends who are helping us work through a dynamic that originally existed in our family system between our parents, our siblings, etc. So I think this exploration needs to, yes, include our own personal history of relationships, but going back into the family system as well. And even if you had a parent, maybe you're raised by a single parent, the absence of that other parent is part of what you're likely working through. Maybe you had an absent parent, and in relationships, you have partners who aren't there for you in the way that you would like. You experience part of them as being absent from the relationship. So there's ways that that can translate too, even if you didn't have two parents in your family system.
It's a great point. Great points. Thank you, Gabriella. And, thinking about the next transit that we're going to be discussing that's happening the same time as this, the same time as Venus in Cancer squaring the North Node in Aries, is Mercury, the messenger of the gods, guide of souls to the underworld, the planet of consciousness, communication, coordination, also transiting through Cancer, forming a trine, a supportive aspect, with Saturn, the god of wealth and time, the planet of restriction, responsibility, hard work, achievement, and authority, transiting through the mutable water sign symbolized by the fish, Pisces. And this transit occurs from June 25th to the 27th, so that's Tuesday to Thursday, with an exact trine occurring the same day that Venus squares the North Node in Aries exactly, which is Wednesday, June 26th. So in thinking about the previous transit, and to your point, how we're reflecting on not just our own origin of how we've been in relationship with other people, but also how we've witnessed relationships in terms of our family. And the parents are a great example, but you can also think of an aunt and uncle or grandparents. All of these are sort of templates of how you've learned to be in relationship. So in thinking about this Mercury in Cancer aligning with Saturn in Pisces, it's really creating an opening for a deeper, more conscious look at what was planted in your unconscious.
Here's an interesting example in my family. My mom's parents, her mom was a Libra and her father was a Cancer. My mom gave birth to me and my brother. I'm a Libra, my brother's a Cancer. So in some ways, she recreated her parents' dynamic in her children. So that's maybe an example of unconsciously and on a spiritual level, right? That she's recreated that dynamic.
Yes.
Something for her to continue to witness the way that she witnessed her parents, she's now witnessing some, at least part of that dynamic in her children. So not necessarily creating it in her own relationship, although there are ways that it's appeared there, I'm sure, for her too. But that's just an interesting example of sort of how generationally there are these patterns that we continue to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've said this before many times that I see so often in the primal triad of family members reflecting signs. So like you said, you're a Libra, your brother's a Cancer, your mom's dad was a Cancer, her mom's a Libra. But even maybe more subtly, you might see that somebody's moon is reflecting somebody's sun or rising sign. And so I guess, the questions for the listeners are, what is that connection to your past that has been in your unconscious that you are now just becoming aware of? What are you learning about your past that maybe you didn't know before, but it's always been there? I think of Saturn in Pisces, it's bringing that sense of reality to the unconscious. Like Saturn, I see so often in people's charts that were born with Saturn in the 12th house or Saturn in Pisces, they oftentimes have limited access to their unconscious because it's the planet of restriction in the sign or the house of the unconscious. But those people tend to be drawn, oftentimes I see through my research, to the arts, to investigating their imaginative side. So, in thinking about this transit, this might be a good week to be creative. Maybe it's a stream of consciousness writing and see what comes up. Or having a conversation with a family member and seeing what comes up. But this feels like a potent time to really uncover how the dynamics of your family, and not just your nuclear family, but your roots, all that came before you, and how they have influenced your unconscious, which has in turn influenced your reality.
It's a powerful exploration.
Yes.
One way to explore this is by doing a family tree, or a genogram, it's also called. And not only can you look at maybe astrological similarities between family members, but you can also look at maybe mental health challenges, maybe other difficulties that have showed up in your family tree. So we know that astrological traits are carried down, but also other traits are carried down, maybe difficulties like substance use or conflict among family members, or fears are carried down as well. And you can start to kind of look at those patterns.
Absolutely. I love the family tree. And I've always been interested in my own family tree, but it took on a whole nother layer when I started getting the daytime and place of birth of all of my extended family. You could really see how, like, say this branch over here, there's a lot of Aries energy, and there seems to be a lot of conflict in that branch. Whereas this branch over here may be more Taurus energy, and there's not as much conflict. They're a little more stable. So it's just interesting that you bring this up, because I think the astrology would reflect a lot of the, like, if there was substance abuse or any other sort of,
Even suicidal ideation or
exactly.
family members who did die by suicide, that can be often traced within the family lineage as well. And you could be feeling, if you're someone who experiences those thoughts, that could be coming from your family system. So it might not actually belong to you solely, but you're carrying it forward.
Yes.
Well, what's interesting for you with that Aries and Taurus, those two traits that you were just describing, is that you have both of those within you.
Yeah.
As a way to relate to both sides of your family tree.
Yes. I'm definitely more in the Taurus realm than the Aries. I mean, I'm just talking about in terms of primal triad. And so,
right.
If you're going to go broader like that, yes, I've got planets in Aries.
I'm just giving an example of kind of how it all filters down.
Totally.
To
yes,
you.
It's such a great point. I also wanted to talk about, in terms of when you were talking about suicidal ideation, it just makes me also want to remind everyone that this transit of Mercury in Cancer aligning with Saturn in Pisces, it's about taking responsibility for what's going on in your unconscious, but doing so in a way that is nurturing, kind, and caring. So if you're experiencing any guilt, shame, regret, or blame, this is a great week to really be kind, caring, and nurturing to yourself in whatever is coming up in your unconscious. Now, to add a little spice to the week, as we get to near the end of the week, on Friday, June 28th, Friday afternoon, 2:54 p.m. Pacific time, is when the Sun in Cancer, the planet of light, life, and vitality, squares off with the Moon, the planet of emotions, in Aries. So this is a conflict of the identity and the emotions. Interestingly enough, the Sun is transiting through the sign that the Moon rules, and the Moon is transiting through the sign that the Sun is exalted in. So it's like kind of that experience of your enemy staying in your house and you're staying in their house. It's maybe a little uncomfortable. It's like the Sun is bringing this vital light to your past, and it may be a little too much heat, overexposed in some way, while the Moon is bringing that sensitivity to the sign that is not really nurturing and rather somewhat impatient. So as we're working through our relationship with our past and our roots and our unconscious, on Friday, as it builds, maybe we start feeling this on Wednesday, Thursday, and it pops on Friday, that tension between everything that's coming up from the past, and you're like, I don't want to deal with this, and you snap. So be mindful of Friday, and we've got two other transits that we're going to talk about on Friday too, but I just wanted to see if you had anything that you wanted to add to what I just shared.
As you describe that sort of experience of having these sort of energies like flipped or somehow out of place, it reminds me of kind of going through the day with your shoes on the opposite feet or something like that. You're like, I
Yes.
can get the shoe on, but something's odd.
Right.
There's
Yes.
something strange here.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That might be how it feels, and it can be very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the half moon. So there's tension between the light and the dark.
I think anytime we're having an experience where it feels like things don't fit, it's often because maybe we need to appreciate more when they do fit. Like it's giving us that experience of contrast, right?
Yes.
We can connect more with joy when we've known suffering.
Exactly.
For example. So we
Yes.
need these opposite experiences. We need this tension and this conflict to be able to really appreciate the relief.
Exactly. Exactly. Something is coming up that needs to be addressed so that you can move into the next moment.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be in the darkness in order to appreciate the light. And vice versa, really.
Right.
You know, there's everything ebbs and flows. And so this is a week where family history, personal history is coming up. And maybe by Friday it comes up in an aggressive way that is showing you something that you need to see, that maybe you've been afraid to look at, but it's been there. And now you need to face it with kindness. Courageously kind. Now, as I said, there are two other transits that are occurring along with this half moon. The sun squaring the moon, the sun in Cancer squaring the moon in Aries. Venus in Cancer forms a sextile, a supportive aspect with Mars, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, and conflict, transiting through the fixed earth sign symbolized by the bull, which we mentioned earlier. Taurus. This transit is occurring from June 26th to the 30th. That's Wednesday to Sunday, with an exact sextile happening on Friday, June 28th, the same day as the half moon. So this is bringing a balancing to the masculine, feminine energies. We have the feminine planet, Venus, in Cancer, aligning with the masculine planet Mars in Taurus, the sign that Venus rules. The earth is bringing form to the water, and the water is nurturing the earth. So here we're looking at the roots of our relationships, whether that be our own personal relationships or how our own personal relationships are a reflection of our familial relationships that we witnessed growing up, or the ancestors that came before us that we didn't even know, that influenced our grandparents and our parents that are now influencing us. Connecting to that Mars energy in Taurus, it's about self-worth and values. This is what we were talking about at the top of the show. What do I need to protect? What is it about my familial relationships or what I've learned from my family and the relationships of those in my family, my parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, so on and so forth? What is it about those relationships that I value that I want to continue to nurture and protect in my own personal relationships? And this is one of those frequencies that's drawing you to where you can say, you know what, I may not have loved everything that my parents did in their relationship, but you know, these 3 or 4 things that they showed me through their relationship with each other are 4 values that I want to continue to use as the cornerstones of my relationships, whether it be with a lover, a friend, or a business partner. That my parents did these 4 things, and these 4 things are something that I'm carrying with me. The other stuff I can leave behind, but I saw that in my parents' relationships. I saw it in my grandparents or my aunts and uncles. This is something that, these are values that I want to carry with me and protect.
I think a nice image maybe for this integration of the Cancer and Taurus energy is thinking about a dry plant that needs to be watered, like thinking about the dry soil. When you look at them separately, maybe you have a glass of water separate from a potted plant that needs water. You can start to understand the relationship between the two differently. The water needs the form, it needs the earth. The earth needs to be nourished by the water. They actually create the potential for that plant or for that life to exist, to be nurtured. So I think of Cancer as this, it's the emotions, the emotional realm, which is something that we feel, but isn't something necessarily that we might recognize tangibly with our senses, versus Taurus is inviting us to connect with how those values really appeared to us through our senses, through our sensory reality. What did we hear? What did we see? What could we touch? What could we taste? So it's a merging of the two, just like when you water that plant.
Yes.
It's creating a bond.
What I hear from you is, like, the imagery that you're giving me is, we're creating something here. You plant a seed in the soil. The seed needs water. It needs the soil. It needs both. It needs the water and the soil in order to grow. And so what I'm hearing from you is this transit is creating an opportunity for you to create something. What do you want to create in terms of your relationships? There's the emotional aspect, but then there's the sensory aspect. The emotions is Cancer, the senses is Taurus. Venus is also the senses, so it's the planet of the senses in the sign of emotions. Mars is the planet of action. So we're taking our connection to what stimulates our senses on an emotional level, and we're putting it into action to bring something into reality in terms of how we relate to others.
And isn't it interesting how reflecting on the past can help us create something new?
Exactly. Yes. That's it. But past is what gives us the template to create.
Either to carry values forward, as you mentioned, that were meaningful to us, or to recognize that you have different values that you want to carry forward.
Yep.
But either way, that awareness of the past can help inform the future.
So the second transit that's happening in accordance with the sun in Cancer squaring the moon in Aries is another squaring that's occurring between Cancer and Aries, which is Mercury transiting through Cancer, squaring Chiron, the wound, and the ancient wisdom that is unlocked through healing that wound, transiting through Aries. This transit is occurring from Thursday, June 27th to Saturday, June 29th, with the exact square occurring the same day as the half moon, the same day as Venus sextile Mars, Friday, June 28th. So as we're integrating the emotional sensation with our sensory reality, Venus and Mars in Cancer and Taurus, we're also needing to face the fears and insecurities that exist within our conscious mind. Like, what comes up for me is, in thinking about your past and familial relationships, like, well, my parents always fought, or my parents got a divorce, so that means I don't know any different. That's what's going to happen for me. Is that same sort of, that fear. That fear that because what I was shown growing up is what I perceived to be a relationship that was unhealthy, or a relationship that failed from my perspective, that's my fate. But again, with this Cancer Aries energy, it's about showing kindness to your insecurities and nurturing your sense of self, nurturing your courageousness. It's like, I really feel bad for my parents or my grandparents for whatever I perceived as their stress or tension in their relationship. I'm going to nurture them in my thoughts. I'm going to be kind to them in my thoughts. And in being kind to them, I'm going to have the courage to create that frequency of kindness within my own mind, so that when I feel the tension in my own relationships that I recall as the tension I experienced in my parents, I'm going to be kind to myself or kind to my partner, in order to nurture the relationship in a way that is more courageous rather than fearful.
It's a powerful shift to be able to make. As I would say, a lot of people are afraid of repeating what they've perceived to be the negative patterns in their family, to carry those forward.
Yes. You know, you hear people say all the time, like, I don't want to be my father, or I don't want to be my mother. And it's like a fear that not only that you're going to become one of your parents, but you know, your parent died of this disease at that age, and so that means that that's my fate. But then we also carry it into our relationships. Well, I saw the way my mom was with the men in her life, or my dad with the women, and then fearful that that's going to be you. Or maybe you idealized your parents in some way and you're like, well, I could never be like them. They just had it so good. It's like they set the bar so high. Whatever it is, there's a lot happening here this week in terms of the dynamics of your own mental processing towards your family, your relationships, and your fears. Mercury continues through Cancer and forms a sextile with Uranus, the planet of revolution, rebellion, innovation, independence, and the unexpected, in Taurus from Friday, June 28th to Sunday, June 30th, with an exact sextile happening on Saturday, June 29th. So as you're going through this soup of the past and relationship dynamics and the family and fears, there's also a revolution happening within your consciousness that says, you know, I can do things differently. I am more complex than just my mom or my dad. It's like if you take two ingredients, like we mentioned last week, I think, which maybe isn't a good example, but it's just funny. Syrup and garlic. You're going to create something that's totally different. And you're maybe going to make that face where it's like gross. But there might be two other ingredients that on their own, you don't really like them. But when you bring them together, it's like, oh, that's nice. That's good. And that's you. That you are not just your mother or your father. You're a combination of the two of them, which is a combination
plus yourself.
Well, yourself is a combination of your parents, which is a deeper complexity of their parents and everything down the line. But the bottom line is, you have the ability to embrace your individuality, to define what that individuality is. So when you think of this Mercury in Cancer forming a sextile to Uranus and Taurus, ask yourself, what parts of my individuality do I want to nurture? I think of myself in terms of, I've always taken pride in my family dynamics, especially in my nuclear family, where people are like, my mom or my dad are like, who are you? Who, like,
They used to say that to you growing up?
Yeah, exactly. Like, whose child are you? You know, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, because I was uniquely my own. And I always took that to be a compliment. That I'm not like my mom or my dad, though I can see aspects of myself that are, but from their perspective, I was very different. So what is it about you on an individual level that's separate from everyone else in your family, in your past, that you want to nurture, that you truly value? What do you value about yourself that is unique to you that you want to nurture?
I think what you're highlighting here is sort of an interesting, maybe interesting to go into, is that when you say that we are each like 50% of each parent, I think what you're referring to is our DNA. Like on a biological level, our bodies are half of each parent. But our spirit, our soul, is just us. So part of what we're working through, and I think is really what we're doing in the individuation process, is working out sort of the conflicts between, I have this imprint, working out this conflict between being uniquely our own spirit inside a vessel that essentially is comprised of matter that came from other people. And you could say that that is the primary conflict of sort of the human experience. We are something infinite inside something finite.
Yes.
That's kind of not ours per se. The body is a loner. It's on rent, right? We're renting this body.
Yep.
And we're sort of managing, like, okay, I've got feet that look like my dad, or I've got, eyebrows like my uncle, whoever. It's like, okay, I've got these physical traits that I've chosen to carry that are really, that's the stuff that's really passed down, is like on a biological level, the body. But what you're inviting, I think, is this awareness of the part of us that is truly just us. That's the spark. And that is what makes us alive. We have spirit inside of matter. That's what makes us alive as a human being.
Yes. And that's what this is, tapping into the individuality of your spirit, while also in the context of everything that you come from.
Right. Recognizing that you're influenced by both.
Yes.
That you are susceptible to the things that have been passed down to you in your family system to a degree, but that you also have agency within that.
It's also, yes. And so in going with that, you have agency within this. What is it about your roots that you want to revolutionize? In what ways do you want to consciously revolutionize your roots?
Beautiful question. And I think, too, part of what we're tapping into here is maybe a misunderstanding that some people carry about astrology. I've heard this from some people who think that astrology is coming from this perspective that everything is sort of outside of our control. Like everything is fated. Everything is destiny. We don't have any free will in it. And I can't be a part of that system because it's too scary. But the truth of it is that astrology helps us understand what is the imprint or the blueprint of who we are, and what is my free will within what I came here to experience. So what is that balance of fate versus free will? And astrology really acknowledges that both are true. It's not one or the other.
Exactly.
And you can see how having a perspective that either completely encapsulates free will could be problematic, and on the other extreme of it, that where you completely believe that everything is fated, could also be problematic. Could lead you into kind of two different extremes, neither of which are really reflecting kind of the truth. The paradox is that it's both. Yes.
That's why I always say it's all how you're working with the energy. The way that the planets and stars have shaped you, that is fixed. If you are a Cancer sun, you're a Cancer sun. You're not an Aries sun. You're not a Taurus sun. You're not a Sagittarius sun. You're a Cancer sun. But it's how you're working with the energy.
Well, I like an analogy that you've given in the past where the birth chart is maybe the car that you're driving.
How are you driving the car?
But you get to drive the car. You get to
Exactly.
decide where it's going.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Exactly. It just makes me think of people in my family are really into Formula One driving. And I just think of like, what would it be like if I was driving one of those Formula One cars? Probably getting a wreck. But if Max Verstappen was driving a Honda Civic, it's all how you're driving the car.
What kind of car do you think you are?
I'm a Honda.
You're a Honda?
Yeah. I'm just an economy car, not fancy. And I'll get you to where you're going. And that's it. I'm not a sports car. I would have liked when I was younger to think that I'm a sports car guy. I think even if I was like, a millionaire, I think I'd still be driving a Honda. Because, I don't know, driving the sports car, I don't know. I just don't envision myself doing that.
Maybe the Honda energy is your Taurus rising. It's like your...
Is it? I think the Taurus
your
rising...
reliability.
Taurus rising would... I guess. I think the Taurus rising would be... I'm driving a Bentley or something, something a little more luxurious.
A little more posh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
I can see that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I think it's maybe my 6th house Venus is, because Venus is the planet of the senses and the 6th house is about practicality.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to driving a car, it's just like, I just want something dependable that's going to get me to where I need to go. Doesn't need to be fancy, but it needs to work. And it needs to work well.
Very much your personality.
Yeah.
That you pride yourself on being reliable, consistent, available.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. That's what I value.
Yep.
So there you have it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the last transit this week is Saturn, the planet of responsibility and restriction and limitation and hard work, begins its retrograde transit through Pisces. Saturn's going to be retrograde through Pisces from June 29th, this Saturday, until November 15th. So that's July, August, September, October, 4.5 months. 4.5 months, we're going to be rewinding our unconscious reality, coming back over all of these parts of ourselves. Now, the overarching sort of understanding of Saturn retrograde in Pisces for me is reviewing in a very real sort of way the reality of our unconscious. Everything that we've experienced from, let's go back to March 23rd. March 23rd is when Saturn moved into its retrograde shadow. So everything that we've experienced, really think about what has been going on with you in terms of your unconscious since March 23rd. You're going to be reviewing that from now until November 15th. And then the third leg of that is from November 15th to February 18th next year, which is when Saturn's going to move out of its retrograde shadow. So where Saturn is right now is where it's going to be on February 18th of 2025. So this period from March 23rd to February 18th, Saturn is combing through the same part of the sky, which are degrees 12 to 19. So I really encourage you to look at your astrological code and what key points or planets are between degrees 12 and 19 in earth signs, water signs, or mutable signs. The mutable signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. The water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. The earth signs are Capricorn, Taurus, and Virgo. What do you have in those 8 signs between 12 and 19 degrees? That is where you are needing to do some work. So for instance, if you were born with, let's say, Venus is always an easy one to do because it's relationships. If you were born with Venus at, say, 19 degrees in Gemini, Saturn has been squaring your Venus for some time, which means you're dealing with some tension between your unconscious awareness and your conscious awareness with regards to your close personal relationships. You're needing to go through a restructuring of how you relate to others. Now, of course, if you are curious to know how this transit, if you're somebody out there who was born with a key astrological point or planet between 12 and 19 degrees in earth, water, or mutable signs, and you're curious to know how this transit of Saturn retrograde will be affecting you, I encourage you to reach out to me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com.
So for people who are experiencing, like you're describing, they have an awareness of these long-term kind of themes that are coming up for them in their life, and they feel like maybe they have a sense of, I just can't learn this lesson. Like, what am I meant to be learning from this? Maybe you're experiencing sort of this extended form of frustration, suffering, wanting to really get to the next level in terms of your self-understanding. Can you explain a little bit about your program, the Cosmic Pathway, and how that might support these individuals? Because it's one thing to come just for a one-off astrological reading, which can be incredibly insightful and exciting. You get these major downloads about yourself, and then you sort of archive that email, or you kind of put that information away. Maybe you don't know what to do with it. But for those who want to go deeper, they're like, I'm really ready to figure out kind of what do I need to be learning from this time in my life? What are some of the other ways to work with you?
So the Cosmic Pathway, which you mentioned, is an investment in yourself. It's committing to time spent with me, an hour a week, for at least 6 months. So if you're somebody who, say, is going through some challenging transits, or maybe you don't even know what the transits are and you're just going through a challenging period of your life. You're transitioning out of one job to another job, or you're looking for a new job, or you're struggling in your relationship. Maybe you're going through a divorce. It could be anything, any sort of shift that seems to be occurring in your life.
Or maybe you would like for there to be a shift.
Exactly.
And there's not a shift.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, great point. Working with me through the Cosmic Pathway, you are inviting me to be a guide in your life. Somebody who is there with you through the struggles, through the challenges. It's my role to bring you clarity, the clarity necessary to help you navigate through this portion of your life. And so, as you say, when you do a reading, it's great, it's exciting. Wow, this person, Scott, who doesn't know me, I know him because I listen to him on his podcast, but he doesn't know me, and he's telling me who I am, and it's resonating with me. Wow. So it's a very enlightening experience, but then what happens after that? That's the integration process. How do you take everything that you've been exposed to in a one-time reading and apply that to your life in a meaningful way that really supports you in shifting in a direction that you want to go?
It's almost like you're like a personal trainer.
Yes, exactly.
So like instead of like maybe you go to the gym and you have learned some workouts online and you're trying to implement them yourself, but you can't really spot your own posture. Like you can't really see maybe where your blind spots are.
Exactly.
It's the same reason why you seek support in these other areas of your life.
Exactly.
It's a process of integration.
Yep.
You know, it feels really good when you get a big download like that, or maybe you go and you do a plant medicine ceremony and you're like, wow, I'm enlightened. I have all this knowledge and information about myself. I feel amazing. You know, and then the next week you're like, I don't know where to start. I'm starting to doubt myself, and Scott said this about me, but that doesn't feel true anymore. What do I do? You know, the self-doubt starts to come in.
Totally. Exactly. I love that you bring up that example of like or that metaphor as a trainer. That's how I see myself, as a energetic trainer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm helping you shift the energy of your life, of your soul. We get caught up in these habitual patterns that we have created because of the experiences that we've had in our life. Like we're talking about all this Cancer energy, all the history that we have experienced through our familial relationships and our roots and our ancestors. And now we're stuck in this loop. How do I get out? How do I become myself? That's what the cosmic pathway is about. It's about helping you see your blind spots, as you mentioned, which your blind spots are habitual patterns that have been created over time that you don't even realize you do. The cosmic pathway helps you break those habits and reform them with healthier habits that are centered on following your North Node. And in following your North Node, that's when the road to life opens up wide for you. And that's what the cosmic pathway is about. You get on the path, it feels narrow, it feels difficult, but as we travel further and further down the path together, it widens up. It's like, wow, okay, now that opportunities are happening. My life is shifting. My relationships feel healthier. I'm doing something for work that I love, that I enjoy, the way that I'm spending my time. That's what this is about. So if you're interested in learning more, or if you're interested in working with me in such an intimate way, where we'd meet weekly for at least 6 months, then email me, Scott at the Weekly Transit, subject line, The Cosmic Pathway. I'll look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Gabriella.
You're welcome. Our question today comes from Susie Uzi. I love the new format. I have Uranus and Scorpio in my 12th house and have been called mysterious and am not intentionally being so. And I'm not sure if this trait is a strength. Could you talk about this placement?
Thank you for your question, Susie Uzi. Love the name. So, Uranus in Scorpio in the 12th house, you've been called mysterious and not intentionally being so. Well, when I think of mystery, I think of Scorpio. Scorpio is a very mysterious sign. The 12th house is the house of the unconscious. So that could indicate that you are operating in a way that you are unconscious of, or that is unintentional, as you say. I'm not sure if this trait is a strength. Again, this makes me want to allude to it's all how you're working with the energy. Uranus is the planet of innovation, independence, the unexpected, individuality. If you were born with Uranus in the 12th house, there is something unique about your imagination. Uranus in Scorpio is a generational transit. Many people were born with Uranus in Scorpio from around 1974-75 until 81-82. Being born with Uranus in Scorpio means that there may be something unique about your sense of intimacy, how you merge and share power with others. Part of that uniqueness comes from an urge to create independence within those intimate bonds. So, putting that all together, Uranus and Scorpio in the 12th house, I could see that as being a placement that would be indicative of you being mysterious. Now, in terms of, I'm not sure if this trait is a strength. I think it's all your perception. In thinking about it as a strength, there's something in your unconscious that's saying, I want to be independent in my close personal relationships. In order to be independent in my intimate relationships, I need to embrace or express the individuality or the independence of my imagination.
What's interesting here that you're alluding to, but haven't explicitly said yet, is that people experience Susie Uzi as being mysterious, but because this placement's in the 12th house, she's also mysterious to herself.
You're right. It's
So
like she's like, I'm mysterious? I don't seem mysterious.
I'm not surprised that you're surprised by this. Because this placement, what's in our 12th house, the 12th house is the unconscious.
Yep.
What defines the unconscious as what we are unaware of.
Yes.
So part of why you're getting this feedback, I think, is to encourage you to develop maybe a comfortability or an awareness with your own mysterious nature and how much lives within your psyche for you to explore. As Scott's describing, this Uranus energy, the energy of creation itself lives kind of behind the scenes for you.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put.
And what could be more of a strength than that? Truly.
Absolutely. Wow. Love that. Love how you sum that up there. So I hope this is helpful to you, Susie Uzi. Let us know how that feels to you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your question. And thank you to you, Gabriella.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Thank you to our listeners.
And thank you to all of our listeners. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
See you then.
Thank you for listening to the Weekly Transit. If you're curious to learn how these transits or any others may be affecting you, or if you are interested in learning more about your astrological code, contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. If you're interested in delving into the world of psychotherapy with Gabriella, You can connect with her at innervisionpsychotherapy.com. This episode was produced by me, Scott Tajarian. Music written by Ben Leinbach from Listen Deep by Amber Herzog Lyman. Wishing you all the best as you ride the planetary waves.